This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, Show 29.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Machaba. As a teenager, Ramsey learned how to play guitar, and now, after being married for 5 years, thankfully my ears don't bleed anymore when he tries to serenade me. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to another podcast episode. Before we get into the meat of the thing, let's talk about some housekeeping items. First off, I just wanted to say that last month I did a webinar for aspiring sales engineers who want to find a job as a sales engineer, just to help them figure out or navigate what they can be doing to become sales engineers. I will be repeating this webinar next week, and so stay tuned for some LinkedIn announcement and Twitter announcement if you'd like to find out more about that. If you're interested or you know someone who's interested, please, once you see that email or LinkedIn post or Twitter post, forward that to them if you think it will be helpful. For today's podcast, my conversation is with Anthony Taok. So Anthony is a fellow countryman of mine. We were both in Lebanon. We were both in the same university. He will mention it, NDU, which stands for Notre Dame University. However, we never met. He even came to Canada. We never met. So it was interesting meeting him via LinkedIn. And turns out we have a friend in common back in Lebanon. So it's a very small world, and he seems to be a great SE, although he may not say that. He's very self-aware, which according to Darren Mason is the number one attribute that SE should have. In this conversation, we'll talk about how he, as a customer, viewed SEs, also how he moved from being a customer to actually being an SE, among other things. Show notes, which will include the links to the books that we discuss in this podcast, will be at wethesalesengineers.com/show29. And without further ado, let's jump into the show. Hey, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ramsey, thank you very much for inviting me, man.
It is definitely my pleasure. And you and I seem to have lived a similar life, but we have never crossed paths, being from Lebanon, then coming to Canada. And with that teaser, do you mind explaining a little bit to the folks listening who you are and what you do and what's going on in your life right now?
Yeah, for sure, Ramsey. So I'm actually a senior solution architect in pre-sales engineering. I work right now in the virtualization, cloud compute, cloud storage, and mostly we target media and entertainment business, where we build tailored solutions for them. I mean, there are too many clouds around the globe, maybe, but we do target specific markets with specific type of customers. So, as you were mentioning, we started in Lebanon. I was in NDU, finished my degree there, started a master's briefly in Lebanon, then moved out to Canada, did research and development in non-conventional areas. So I was working like 600 feet underground in mines. Worked on neural networks and ultra-wideband, which is still to be fully available on the market as a technology, but it promises very high bandwidth for personal area networks, all your equipment around your body and what's not. From there on, moved to Montreal, worked in engineering development. Where I was working, we developed the first 200 megabits per second service, full network. We're talking about like 2008, 2009. From there on, moved to pre-sales engineering, was working more on initially worked on layer 2, layer 3 networks, then moved to machine-to-machine solutions. I mean, the machine-to-machine was just coming into the market, and we needed to develop some products on that. And, I jumped a couple of other companies, and which landed me right now with the company where I am. We are based in New York. The mother company is in Austria, and as I mentioned earlier, we work in cloud solutions.
Okay, I'm curious. You mentioned that you worked like 600 feet underground.
Yeah,
So were you mining or were you working on software solutions for
yeah.
miners?
I was not mining at all.
Oh,
We were
okay.
actually working on a geolocalization uh, system that can survive extreme, conditions, and mostly for disasters. Because, as you might know, in case of disasters, most of the time all communication is completely lost.
Yes.
So one of the reasons we used ultra wideband because it covers this like 10 gigahertz spec. So you could still recuperate part of your signal, whether it's short wavelength or longer wavelength. So ultra wideband has some good characteristics. So we were using fingerprinting actually based on the propagation characteristic of the signal in those areas in order to kind of uh, reconstruct a location based on a fingerprint. Uh, Funny enough, I've seen some Wi-Fi localization techniques that are used now in marketing, targeted marketing. In, let's say you go to a store, you use the Wi-Fi there, and based on that, they know where you're standing, what you're looking at, and what's not. So those use now fingerprinting techniques, which I found, to come to the market maybe 4 or 5 years after I worked on my research. Have to say, it was not my research that got them there, but it was fun to watch that technology come into the market.
Nice. So you've been a systems engineer or even a senior systems engineer for close to 4 years, correct?
Yes, different companies though.
Okay. So before that, you were a software designer or
No, so you gotta go junior, senior, what's not the different levels. But before that, I actually did. Have you ever heard of DOCSIS? I was a
yes.
network engineer. Yeah, so I was
Okay.
developing, broadband solutions,
Okay.
like research and development for Videotron, if you know the company.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar
Yep.
with the company. Just so people know, it's like comparable to Verizon Wireless or AT&T or Orange in Europe. But it's for
Yes,
Canada. Uh,
yes, it is in Canada.
yeah. So I'm just trying to understand how you went from not being an SE to being an SE. But basically, you worked with customers before
Yes.
getting the switch. Did you find?
So,
Go ahead.
so honestly, as I was doing research and development, and I was telling you I was developing some of the newest services. I mean, me and different teams, but I was specifically responsible for the CPE, customer premise equipment.
Okay.
So I was working with a lot of different providers back in the days. I mean, Cisco, Scientific Atlanta, which kind of Cisco bought, uh, Motorola, which doesn't exist that division anymore, Nokia. I worked also with, I don't know, D-Link, uh, Huawei, you name it, I worked with them. So working with those people, I kind of got very interested in the sales engineering part because I used to work with a lot of those sales engineers. Um, and from there on, I put a career path and jumped into that.
So were you a customer first, or like
Yes.
so you were a customer of Cisco, Motorola,
Yep.
and those folks,
Yes.
and then
Exactly.
were you a customer with the current company you're working for?
Yes, I was a customer of the company. So, we did not end up buying equipment for every single one of those. I was
Yes.
doing, proof of concepts, vetting different types of technologies, what they're using, what's not pricing wise, and what's not, roadmaps, where we're going in the next years. So, but yeah, I acted as a customer from an engineering perspective with them. And I was working with some of the uh, oldest sales engineers, I would say, on the market deck. And, it got me very interested in that position.
So as a customer, what differentiated a good sales engineer for you versus a bad one?
Hmm. Uh, to be quite honest, it's responsiveness.
Okay.
And by that I mean, at the end of the day, no one knows everything. Everybody would know something, miss on something. Some of them would know a little bit more than the other ones. But I mean, when you're looking for new technologies, when you need, transparent answers, the right answers, when you need this type of relationship. So I would tell you, we had the best relationships with people that tend to answer quickly and be truthful about what they say.
Okay. So how did you know that they were being truthful? Like, were you able to go verify what they were saying, or?
Well, let's say this way: you cannot hide for long. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're developing new product and you have to deliver on certain time frames, whether it being it's performance wise or spec wise, uh, some people try to push it, and with a couple of lies just so they get to maturity of the product or what's not. But you cannot do that. I mean, you could do that maybe for a month, maybe two. You cannot do that on a long term.
So you're saying you require a certain feature or function, and they would say, yes, it's coming. It's
Yeah.
coming soon. It's coming soon. But then 3 months
Yes.
later, it's still not there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or let's say I'm developing 1 gigabit per second product, and I see a chipset that's kind of having 0.1% packet drops, and they're like, oh, we have a solution for that. It's just a software thing, and
Okay.
1, 2, 3 softwares down the line, you still have packet drops.
So,
I mean, you tend to lose confidence in those.
yeah. So they're fudging the truth, basically.
Yep.
I find that more of a salesperson situation more than an SE. Or have you seen SEs do that?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're right. I mean, but here's the thing: the salesperson will tell you everything is available.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, but even that, I've worked with some of the senior salespeople back from, Videotron to Dallas to Casa, and even here where I work right now, I work for Anexia now. I have some of the best sales account managers. Uh, their approach is actually to manage with the customer instead of fly to the customer. I mean, because I think if you have enough experience in the market and you want to keep this long-term relationships, you need to be truthful about stuff. So even good account managers, they tend to be uh, truthful about what they say. I mean, then you work with them instead of working against them type thing.
I agree with you 100%. So I've had a couple different salespeople in the past.
Hmm.
One of them is just all about, yes, we have everything, and
Hmm.
the other one is let me manage the customer, let them know what we have and what we don't have, what's happening.
Hmm.
And he seemed to be liked way more by our customers versus the other one.
So, Ramsey, to be honest, your customer is an engineer, and I'm not saying it. So he understands the reality of things. I mean, you gotta at least give him that, and once you recognize that, uh, he would they would understand. I mean, I remember one situation where we were building a fully redundant network for a customer. That was like a couple of years ago, and right in the middle of all of that, uh, a new trainee single-handedly dropped the entire network by sending traffic from both sides to a black hole. So there you go. You have a fully redundant network that, you know, during the POC proof of concept just fell with 0 packets going through. Everything's going to that black hole. Uh, I mean, you go to that engineer, you tell them, hey, here's what happened. Here's what happened with us. This will not happen again because the people that got access, we're going to change the process for them never to get access to this. Only this type of people will have access and what's not. And, they understand that. I mean, they do have problems on their daily life too as engineers. So, I mean, they can understand this level of conversation.
So was it the customer's engineer who caused the outage, or was it
Nope.
your engineer?
No, it was ours.
It was your engineer.
Yeah, if it was
Is,
the customers, that would be easy.
is he still working for you guys?
Uh, he's still working for the company. I'm not.
Okay.
I mean,
But that happens. Like,
yeah,
it's sometimes like a typo that can cause issues, and especially for networks like that. And
I,
the
yeah.
audience is generally bigger than just network. It could be SaaS or whatever. But
Hmm.
in networking, like I did that, and I almost caused an outage.
Hmm.
But then I realized what I was doing, and I had my job a couple of days later. So it was like little things can cause big issues, and if it's your customer who sees it, and you must have had a very good customer to accept Was it a live network?
So we were actually right at the end of the POC proof of concept. They were starting to migrate some services on it. It was not fully live yet.
Okay. Maybe that's why. All right.
No, but I mean, as you said, I mean, mistakes do happen, and we're not here I mean, if that engineer learned out of that not to do the same mistake, I would be happy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like
so
sometimes the higher
yeah,
ups don't see it. Sometimes heads
and,
need to roll. So if you're an engineer
yes,
working with networks, just be careful
yes,
because everybody
yes,
makes
exactly.
mistakes, except your mistakes might be costly. So
So I agree with you, but also, I mean, you got to look at it. There's an angle, which is we provide an SLA. Let's
yeah.
say 99.99% availability year to year.
Yes.
So basically, that was a big incident. They got like lost for service for 2 hours or so. But in the grand scheme of things, for the next 12 months, we just made sure they never have any other problem. So from a company perspective, we also kind of reduce the risk of breaking our SLA. I mean, you still have to deal with those. You still take precautions afterwards and what's not. Uh, but the guy survived. Let's say he survived. The customer accepted the explanation, and we moved on.
Okay. Do you mind just explaining to the folks listening, although most of them might already know it, what an SLA is and what the 5 nines are?
Okay, well, so service level agreement, which is kind of a contractual obligation that you give to the customer about the availability of his services. Um, Different companies, different services have different service level agreements. As a small example, I mean, let's say you have an old switch or even a new switch. Switching equipment usually never fails, and never is too big of a word, but let's say they can be available 99.99999% of the time. But then behind that switch, you add a router, which is, gives you the routing capabilities. Behind that router, you have a couple of fibers. One of the fiber fall down. Now, okay, your service is no longer available at 100% capacity. So when you build a network like that, the more equipment you add or the more component you add, you have to build up a statistical number about the availability they can provide for such a network or for such an equipment or for such a service. And that's usually based on a statistical combination of the different uh, availability numbers for each and every component of the network. Uh, I mean, one part could actually be just accidental. A truck will hit a fiber pole, all the fibers down. I mean, you cannot really account for that, but you do put a small margin to account for that. So that's kind of a service level agreement. Uh,
Right.
in a simplistic way.
No, that's very good. I wanted to go back to you being a customer, and then did they approach you for an SE position? Did you approach them for the SE position? How did it work?
So I actually did not approach those guys for an SE position. Um, we just had, they became friends. Some of them are still friends now. They've been all over the industry, and once a year or once every 2 years, we still, um, get a gathering together, have a couple of beers, enjoy a basketball game or something like that. So um, those people, I mean, you develop working relationships with them, but also you develop some good friendships in the industry with that. Um, I did not approach those companies I was working with. I think it was a little bit unethical, for them to come after me also on certain perspectives, because it can sort of influence my judgment on their equipment. It's like, oh, you get our equipment in and we'll give you a position that pays higher or what's not. Uh, so there was always this kind of taboo about having these conversations with any potential providers. Uh, but I actually moved through within the same company, which was Videotron, to a separate division that needed uh, sales engineers. And once I was in the sales engineering position, I started moving to different companies from there.
Okay, so you moved to a sales engineering position within the same company, and then you moved out.
Yep.
Okay, but just to comment about the unethicalness of being offered a job, it depends how it's done. I think
Yes.
if they offer you the job after a purchase, where they didn't let you know that ahead of time that if you take the job, if you buy from us, we give you a job,
Hmm.
then that could be ethical. But then you're struggling with the point that you just pissed off the
Yeah,
customer because they lost a good employee.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So
so it was a little shady around these areas, and for that specific reason, I mean, the market is so wide, you don't need to do that. And, there are so many companies around. You'd actually, I mean, you can avoid those 10 companies and still be a sales engineer.
well, actually, I became a sales engineer to a company which my old company was a customer of.
Okay.
But I did that. So I never worked with them because they went through a reseller and then they created
Yeah.
their own local sales team, and I was the first to apply.
Hmm.
And that happened as soon as I got the job. It had nothing to do with buying from them. But
Hmm.
the first thing they were concerned about is like, what are we going to tell your company when you go see them? Why did you leave?
Yeah.
And I had to like basically tell the truth that I wanted a sales engineering position that didn't have too much travel, and
Yeah.
because we had sales engineers within Nokia, but the travel was like 80% of the time.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that seemed to work well for us. So just be careful.
So,
Yeah.
and you know what? It's kind of a very, um, um, it's almost a one-way highway. Usually going from the manufacturer to work for a specific client is much more seen in the industry than going from the client to work for the manufacturer. Um, and it comes because you're selling this customer the equipment, the product very well. They're implementing this new product on their network, so they will go after you based on that type of knowledge.
Yeah, you'll be the consultant for them.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right. So now you've been in SE for a few years. Uh,
Yep.
Now, since you've been doing that, what do you think makes a good SE?
I'm not the best example, I think. To be quite honest, I do think having two things, especially in today's world, you need a lot of knowledge about everything. I mean, um, everything is integrated right now, and they would throw at you different concepts, different, technologies, all of that. Um, I believe, in my own opinion, a good SE is somebody who knows his product very well, but also who can understand how things work around his product and not just his product. So you can have a level of conversation with your customer that can address that specific customer's needs and worries, actually. Um, and so know your product very well, know what you can offer, know how things work together, and listen. Because believe it or not, I mean, um, you know, Amazon is a cloud provider, and they have 80% of the market. Then Google came after them, then other companies came, and you see a big ecosystem of cloud providers right now. Not every customer is with Amazon, although they do have a big share. And the reason is different customers have different needs, and they need different, maybe, type of treatment, different attention, and what's not. So be very attentive to what they're trying to express, and how you can help them with that. They always appreciate that. Uh, One of the things I could tell you, a lot of the people that never bought from me, we ended up still having a long-term relationship where they would, still talk to you, still tell you what they're trying to do from time to time. And whenever you're at the right time, right situation, they would still buy from you again. Versus, I mean, if you're just trying to shove a product and sell it at any price, they would feel that. And at the end of the day, you will lose that type of connection. It would be like one and done. Either you sold them something or you didn't, and you lost them forever. So listen very well, I guess, and read a lot about everything that's coming.
That's a good sum. I was going to summarize it, but you did it for me, so thank you. Um, I'm curious. You just mentioned you're not a good example of of a good SE, but then you had a very convincing answer. And but as soon as you said that, I kind of smiled because I think the same way about myself. Like you can always be better. But I'm curious. Would you mind sharing why you think what you need to do to be that SE you were talking about?
So,
By the
I
way,
mean,
if you don't want to
yes.
talk about that, I can edit this out later.
No, Ramsey, you don't need to add this out. I look at this as a ongoing experience personally, and I finished an MBA while I was doing while I was working full time, and some of the things I learned about human interaction, human resources, and things like that. They teach you a lot about a company. So where I find myself today is I work a lot on the account strategy. You know, so at that point I know I'm good, but I do believe that there are some other aspects about maybe negotiation and things like that where I need to work on. So I mean, in my own opinion, I still need to work on a lot of things. So that's why my answer is I don't think I'm the best at it, but
Well, so I was talking to a gentleman the other day, Darren Mason, on a couple of episodes back, and he said the greatest asset that an SE could have is self-awareness,
hmm
which, based on what you just said to me, you seem to have, and you know what you need to work on. So I guess that's a positive thing. I'm not trying to make you feel better, but just pointing out that if you already have that, that means you know what you need to work on, and you'll never stop getting better.
mm. So I think that's the best human asset. I mean, if you and me stayed with what we learned when we were like, let's say 12 years ago, you would not be where you are today.
Yep.
So being aware that you need to move, being aware that you want to work on your things, and hey, I'm fine with people who are happy where they are and they want to stay there. I have no issue with that. I'm just saying that personally, I like to see where are the things that I can work on and improve, and it's worked fine for me so far.
So you mentioned that you could work on negotiation and that sort of thing, but as an SE, how much negotiation do you usually do? Is that something you do often?
So depends on the side of the company you work for. With larger companies, I was less involved in the negotiations aspect, and where I am today, I actually a little more involved in that because um, the smaller the company is, the more hats you have to wear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and one thing also, I mean, it's always a teamwork. I mean, between account management and myself, it's a teamwork. And when you're in the middle of a contract negotiation, any good idea, any good input could help a lot. So,
So you're talking about strategizing with the account management team, not necessarily going yourself in front of a customer and negotiating on price.
so even if I'm in front of a customer, which basically there are at least two or three of us in front of the customer, uh, it's not a good cop, bad cop type of play, but I mean, different people can bring different inputs
Okay.
to that same negotiation.
Yeah, my sales, it also depends on the sales guy if he wants you to do that or not. A lot of sales guys just want you to shut up while they're talking about price, which
Yeah,
is fair. I want them to shut up while I'm talking technology.
yeah,
But it depends if the sales guy is technical, then he can talk about it a little bit. But
okay.
if an SE is
Mhm.
like
So,
myself, I don't negotiate, but I kind of throw out things like, "Oh man, you're getting a like this is the best price I've seen for this thing," especially if it's true. I don't say that if it's not true, but
yeah,
like you guys get a big discount anyways. Like I don't know how much more you want, but you can try.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's exactly what you're saying there. I mean, in my situation where you're building complex solutions, it's not one single product. So I have a little better awareness of the total costs of the solution, which kind of, um, gives me some advantage onto knowing where we can go and where we cannot go from it final pricing. And I don't necessarily have to mention numbers in front of the customer, but I can influence the conversation still without necessarily having to mention numbers.
That's a very good point. All right, so you mentioned that some customers, you made friends with them, but they didn't buy from you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are the reasons why customers would be friends with you, but they wouldn't buy from you?
So first things, let's talk about the complexity of this. The type of equipment that what I was selling and the type of solutions that I work on, even right now for cloud. I mean, the previous company, the sales cycle was 2 to 3 years at least.
It's fun.
Where I am today and with the type of solutions we're trying to make, it could be 6 months to 1 year as a sales cycle. So, you deal with those people back and forth. It's not like just hello, goodbye, and we're done. Why don't they buy? Because, you start working with certain engineers, let's say engineering department, they have certain needs, they have certain requests, and you work with them, you develop what you can develop, you provide a solution based on what you have. But other companies also have solutions. Other companies also have, salespeople, and other companies have their own relationships too. I could tell you it's only because of politics, but that would be an overstretch. When you look, let's say, let's say about maybe Comcast in the U.S. Everybody knows Comcast. So Comcast today they have a huge list of providers. So when they're trying to look for a new product, you might be invited to the table because you have something that's that's better than anyone else and everyone else. But at the end of the day, whatever you have has a price list for them. I mean, it's this much to buy this new technology, but it's going to cost me that much to get a new provider into my provider's list, just into their system, into their, warehousing software and what's not. So sometimes just introducing a new provider can cost millions without even buying a single product. So companies do look at those at the end of the day. And based on those, they take decisions. It's not just about your product. It's not just about your relationship with them. It's a full, they have their own ecosystem in there, and you have to fit in there. And sometimes they look at it and they're like, oh, I'm saving $2 million. It's going to cost me $1 million to get those into my system. I still have $1 million in my pocket. It's worth it. Sometimes it will be, well, I really like what they have, but it's going to cost me so much. It's going to be so disruptive. I have to teach my technicians all this new technology, and they might look at it and say it's not worth it. So, it's not like a very straightforward decision for them. There are multiple factors.
Yep. I've seen that several times. Like, I'd love to say I won every deal I fought for, but it doesn't always work like that. You just get mad and fight for the next one.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. From a SE perspective, I'm curious, in your domain, how is the SE involved in the different stages of the sales cycle, like qualification, discovery, or needs analysis?
It's, it depends a lot on the account manager you're working with. Some of them are a little technical. Some of them are less technical. Some of them like to introduce you at the beginning of the opportunity. Some of them like to explore the opportunity a little bit before they introduce you into it. So, it is something that kind of fluctuates based on, situations, people you're working with, and opportunities. But in the best of the scenarios, you'd be involved in it from A to Z. From step one up until the contract is signed, and even the first couple of deliveries, because you have that relationship with the customer. From my end, at least, I like to still pamper the customer a little bit, if you want. I like to make sure that the first couple of deliveries are done in a very good way and they're happy with it. And by that time, people know the product better. Your company knows how to deliver better, and that, it becomes easier for post-sales engineers to take a hold of it.
A lot of SEs say, even good ones, say they don't want to be involved from the get-go. Like, there are things that the salesperson should be doing, not because they don't want to work or anything, just because they have their own things to do. They need to work. Like, they can't go to every meeting a sales guy goes to and then work on demos, work on proof of concepts. Have you seen that?
So that's basically, as I was saying, it depends on the account manager mostly, and on the size of the company you work for. I personally, I have an agenda. I have so many hours during a day. If I'm available, I will enjoy this conversation. One of the reasons I'm in sales engineering is because I like meeting new people and talking to them. So if my agenda allows, and I'm not traveling around the world for just half an hour meeting that I don't need to be there, I wouldn't do it. But if my agenda allows and, I'm needed there, I will definitely jump on it. I will not miss an opportunity to meet new people. Um, Having said that, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've met some engineers, I'm not going to name the company, that actually had this type of behavior, and some of the customers were not necessarily happy with that. Um, I mean, when you sit at a table, you have a responsibility to present your company well, but also you have an advantage for your company. I mean, people tend to trust you. You know, there's a different in a sales team. You have the account manager who has a certain type of relationship with the customer, and you have the sales engineer who has a different type of relationship with the customer. And believe it or not, even the finance people would like to see a sales engineer sometimes sitting on the table where they can, check his reactions, ask him specifically about some stuff. And, they're not technical at all, but they appreciate the fact that, you give them that as let's call it courtesy, a courtesy of being ready to answer and help on a technical perspective, or explain how things work and what's not.
So, what is the difference in the relationship between account manager and customer and SE and customer?
Uh, well, last, simplest thing. One of them is purely numbers. The other one is purely technical. And it's not that black and white, but I mean, that's one of the, simplest things. And I think during the conversation, you already mentioned that, one of your salespeople would say yes to anything. But if you were sitting on that table, I'm pretty sure you cannot just say yes. Even if you want to say yes, you would put a conditional yes. You'd say, if we look at it this way, or if we do it that way. I mean, you still provide a more accurate, realistic answer to that conversation.
So, let me try to. All right. So, the customer, you say
Yep.
like he would trust the SE more versus the account manager more. Is that what you're trying to say, or
Well, on the technical aspect of things.
okay? And he would trust the account manager more on the financial aspects.
I mean, if he needs an escalation, probably you'll see him going to the account manager, because account management and money are related directly to customer happiness, and
Yeah.
so, so they know how to use both parts of the relationship. I'm not worried for customers; they know how to work it.
Right. And you mentioned you travel for work.
Yes. Yep.
How do you manage your time if you're traveling? You said you don't go for half-hour meetings. How do you make sure that your meetings you're going to are not half-hour?
I mean, first of all, any travel has to be approved. You have to have a very good reason for it. You have to have, uh, a lot of the times, I mean, when I'm traveling, it's because um, it's definitely needed. The customer specifically asked for something where I need to be there, or there's a big show where we're gonna meet like 5, 6, 10 different customers, you know, or we're closing this very big deal, and you need to be there to answer certain information. It's not like I just wake up and say I'm traveling today. It's um, it works through the days, through the requirements, through the opportunities, and decisions have to be made when you're traveling and when not. I worked with some people that would jump on a plane. They really like to travel, which I do, but I mean they would jump on a plane for every single potential reason, whether it's needed or not. And I'm happy for them. Their company's fine with it. They're fine with it, and I'm happy for them. I tend to, um, you know, look at it a little bit also from a monetary perspective, how much my trip is going to cost and how much is it worth. And if I don't personally find any good reason for it, and the customer is not specifically fighting for it, I would not do it. In general, but every rule is meant to be broken.
The reason I was asking is, like I mentioned earlier, I only work in Ottawa, and I'm always curious about
Mhm,
how, like, I find it easy for me to visit my customers. All my customers are within like
mhm,
2 feet from each other. So
mhm,
I'm always curious about how people who work with customers all over the country do it.
mm.
So
Yeah, so I mean, okay, let's say, uh, example, last year, my biggest customer was in Montreal actually, but they had this show for operators happening. Where was it? I think it was here, like in Boston or what's not. So, I mean, I was not traveling for my personal customer, but I was traveling for the need of me being there as, representative or what's not. I mean, at that point, it was a pleasure to do it. A different opportunity where they wanted me to go, like Saskatchewan or what's not, and I had some deliverables within that same period. So I, kindly asked them if they can ask someone else, which they did, and it worked fine for both of us. So, it depends on availability, depends on the opportunity, depends on what's being needed, how urgent it is or not.
all right, next time I get a job that requires me to travel, I'll keep that in mind. You, so as you've been an SE for a bit of time,
Yeah.
what do you see the next steps are for you? You mentioned that you sound a little bit more ambitious than just being an SE since you already achieved it at a young age. What's next for you?
I don't think it's an achievement to start with, but
I think it
that's a,
is.
that's a very good question. So I hit SE before my 30s actually, which is great. Um, if if from that perspective, as I was telling you, I did look a lot at. I did finish an MBA, and a big part of it was about globalization and strategies and what's not. Uh, I cannot personally. I mean, if I want to be truthful to myself, I cannot go back to research and development. Um, Nonetheless, I do not want to be in account management right now. Maybe later on in my life, that might be the next position, and it's one of the straight passes from SE to account management. It happens so frequently in the industry. It's just right there. Um, I'm not in there yet, neither. So for the time being, at least for the 1 or 2 years I can see in front of me, I have been a team lead. I have worked on managing a couple of resources. I also worked on customer program management. I mean, manage customer their requests for the next 2 3 years. Add that to your product development and what's not. So I do probably see myself helping build a team of SEs. Finding the right people that could help the company grow as we're growing right now and what's not. Maybe that's where I will be in the next 2 years or so.
Nice. At
Mm.
least you have a somewhat of a clear vision of where you want to go, which is great. And
So I don't know who said that, but he was a big entrepreneur. I think, and he used to say it's as important to know what you don't want as to know what you want. So at least I know what I don't want for now.
that's that's more than some of us. So good job on that. It is time to shift gears and get into the not so fire round, where I ask you the same questions I've asked a lot of other people, and you just take your time answering them. All right. The first question is: other than a notebook and a pen, what is an essential tool an SE should be using?
Wow, I'm gonna say smile.
Okay, no one ever said that. That's a good one.
Well, as one of the good buddies of mine, senior account manager, he's kind of made millions by being account manager. He sold the major accounts all over the place. Um, he always said, "People buy from people."
People buy from people.
Yeah,
That is true.
at least for now. I mean, I don't know how artificial intelligence is going to change this paradigm, but for now, people buy from people. And, everybody appreciates a smile.
That's true. I think being an SE, you're kind of. I might be giving SEs too much credit, but I think your job is safe from artificial intelligence in the sense that people still need to talk to people and understand from them the technology versus artificial intelligence. I may be completely wrong. I may be completely way off base, and this is not.
Well, I would be happy if it remains the same for the next 10, 15 years. Where after that, I'm happy. I'll be fine no matter how it goes. But I've seen a lot of work on if you've seen the retail, I've seen a lot of work. I mean, program which was started as inventory management that became more of a negotiation program about buying new inventory and what's not. Maybe not widely deployed, but definitely has been worked on a lot. And I guess a lot of the artificial intelligence related to two systems negotiating at certain point and what's not. I mean, people are working on this. Will that become an actual live scenario in these types of things? I do not know. But it's not because they like working on it. There's a lot of work on these types of, negotiating.
Yeah, but someone has to sell that too. So.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine it this way. You as a company, you need a product. You'll be linked to every other company's, let's say, artificial or database or whatever you want to call it, or, data lake or what's not. And you start, without you interfering, you would start, an artificial intelligence start listing the requirements, and as companies or other artificial intelligence say yes or no, you start narrowing down the list. And maybe at the end you still need one person or not, but I mean, something like that where they can actually narrow down the requirements up to the smallest detail without the need for you and me to be present.
All right, well, that'll be an awesome discussion.
Yeah, all right. I'm hoping not, but I mean, I could see something happening.
Yeah, we'll have to sit down, you and I, over a drink and just get drunk thinking about
whenever
that.
You come by, man.
All right, sounds good.
Whenever you come by, you're due to a visit from Manhattan, no?
You haven't been, so maybe I should.
There you go.
Is there a book or resource that every SE should read or be exposed to?
Wow. You got me speechless on this.
We can move on, and if you think of something, we can come back to it. If you don't, then we don't have to.
Some of the books that I really enjoyed, one of them is called The Outliers, and other one is Good to Great. And why do I like those? It's because both of them talk about those people that managed to build something out of the ordinary, and both of them try to find explanations and reasons. So Good to Great tells you about level 5 leadership, which is very, very interesting. And what is a level 5 leader is even more interesting. But for me, it was a lot of learning about how to deal with people based on that. I mean, what's a leader? How does he talk to people, and why can he be? How can you get to people? How can you get to let you in so you can have deeper conversation, what's not. And The Outlier speaks about the like Bill Gates and the likes, and mostly comes out with a very small formula where very simplified maybe, but takes at least 10,000 hours to be an expert at something. And I mean, at the end of the day, it says you really have to work to get somewhere. And by work, it doesn't mean you have to, sit on a chair in the office for 12 hours. It means you have to be very smart about what you're choosing to work on, how you do it, and, staying involved in the things related to what you're trying to do on a daily basis. So I think both of those are very important because one of them is you want to stay in the technology and you want to stay in a very effective way. The other one is you really want to be able to deal with people in a good way because, that's 50% of being a pre-sales engineer.
I have not read those. I will add them to the list of to my reading
So
list.
they're not technical. They're definitely not technical, but
That's fine. I've most of the books that I read are not technical. Like
oh, great.
in terms of like books like you were mentioning,
Hmm.
there's also How to Win Friends and Influence People,
Yes,
which is Dale Carnegie.
yeah,
Yep.
Carnegie. Yeah.
And I think a book you might like would be Extreme Leadership by Jocko Willing.
Hmm.
Have you read that?
Okay. I have not, but I'm writing the name as we speak.
Yeah. So this guy is a Navy SEAL, and he talks about leadership within a Navy SEAL and outside, how they can implement the same stuff in companies. So I just found that very interesting.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
All right. Question number 3. Do you have any tips or tricks for time management and task organization?
I'm really bad at this.
Okay.
Or at least my perception of myself is that I'm bad at this. So I will not give any advice.
Okay. Sounds good. Moving on. Maybe we can have a discussion about that after. Is there an advice you would give NSE that you feel they never get from anyone else?
That they will never get from anyone else. I'm not that special, actually. My one and only advice is speak out.
What was that? Speak out?
Speak out. I mean, not necessarily in front of the customer, but I mean, I've seen a lot of SEs that sometimes take a back role to the account management, but they would have a lot of good ideas. They'll be a little passive on them. So um, I'm fairly convinced that speak out, it's not going to get you into trouble. Worst case is your ideas will not be implemented or they will be discussed and not approved. But I mean, if you don't speak out, there's definitely your ideas are going nowhere.
Very good point. And maybe I should change this question to, and I'm going to ask you to what I'm going to change it. What is the best advice you have been given?
I think we kind of spoke about it earlier. It's people buy from people.
Very good point.
I mean, you're dealing with a human. Sometimes they have good days, sometimes they have bad days, sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're angry, sometimes, so you got to understand that you don't take it personal. You learn how to manage. If they're angry, like maybe cut the conversation short today, start it tomorrow. If they're not happy about something, try to dig deeper, understand what's they're not happy about. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes just by digging, you'll know that they just cannot buy from you, and that by itself will save you a lot of time and energy. So, you're dealing with people.
That's a very good way to end the show.
Okay.
So thank you, Anthony, for your time. I appreciate it. That was a fun conversation.
I actually had a lot of fun, Ramsey, and as I was saying, we need to get a drink here, so plan your trip, let me know, and let's catch up live.
All right. Sounds good. And
Okay, my friend.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Take good care.
You too. Welcome all to the end of the show. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for being here. If you're finding this this podcast useful for you guys, and you found something that you would like to share with other people, please don't hesitate to do that. I'm trying to build a community of SEs here so we can all help each other. So do that if you will. Second note is, if you'd like to support the podcast, and so I can keep churning out more of these if they're helpful to you, the only way you can do that at this point is through going onto my website, clicking on any Amazon link, and buying whatever it is that you want to buy. It doesn't cost you anything. It'll give me a little bit of commission, and it will help me sustain this long term. This is a hobby that I'm doing right now, but having some form of small income would actually help me a little bit to keep going. Show notes are at wetheSalesEngineers.com/show29. Keep an ear out for the webinar announcement that I will be having later this week. The announcement is later this week. The actual webinar will be next week at some point. So that's it for me. Thank you guys for listening. This is Ramsey signing off.